So thanks, Brona, and thanks for the Institute of Sustainability Studies for having me again. Very excited to from be with you all. For those who have met me yet, my name is Marvin Uehara. I am a faculty at the Temple University here in Japan, and well, originally from Brazil. If you're just wondering about my accent. Well, as I said, I'm very excited here because sustainability, environmental issues is something I'm really passionate about. So today we'll be talking about the hits and misses of this COP and what can we expect, right, of this important climate summit. So there are three learning goals I want all of us to take away today. So first, let's just remember quickly, not an entire historical overview of the previous COPs, but the last two ones. So now we are in the 30 is finishing tomorrow, but we had it every year. So we're gonna briefly just touch on some of the main historical landmarks or some of the biggest frustrations from the first COPs, right? The 28th and the 29th. So also we're gonna talk about the COP30, some of the priorities, and really quick update on what has happened and not in this the summit, and also a little bit of like I will highlight some of the what was expected, what have been the pledges, the promise, but actually what have been achieved, what's the reality. And finally, let's finish the session by identifying what does that mean for businesses, for not too much for large multinational business, but for medium small businesses, particularly in the context of the UK, Ireland. Okay, so the COP28 and COP29. So if you're wondering about COP, I assume that all of you know it's called the Commission of the Parties, right? So it's also all the different nations they come together and they talk about. It's one of the biggest climate summit or the biggest climate summit that happen annually. And now have been a lot of discussion in this conference of the parties about what the new configuration, the new design of these conferences moving on, right? So, but we're not going to discuss that in detail, right? So first, let's see what have been achieved in the two previous ones. So, but before we talk about the two previous COPs here, it's very important. Just one is not in the slide. I want you to just refresh your memories. I'm sure all of you heard about the Paris Agreement, right? This actually making a direct reference to the COP21. So 10 years ago. So that was very important because it was that time that all the countries agreed that in order to limit the global warming to the benchmark, to the standards of 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius, to compare to pre-industrial levels, according to the recommendation of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, we need to take some actions, right? So there was a general agreement on that. So that became so important to the discussion. So the COP21, 10 years ago in Paris, the Paris Agreement. So this number, 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, is something that works as an important indicator for throughout all the different COPs that happen afterwards. But then we have now different COPs that happen. You see the 22, 23, but now let's skip forward. Let's fast forward to the 28th, right? So the 28th COP happened in the United Arab Emirates in Dubai 2 years ago. So that was historical because very early in that because in that summit, there was the first time the term fossil fuels, it was agreed to come in the final document of that summit. And that was considered a major milestone, right? In addition to that, there was this activation of an advocacy that had happened historically over a long period of time, particularly in the COP27, about activate a fund about the loss and damage fund, which was aimed at helping, assisting, particularly developing countries, because those are the ones who are disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change. But climate change now more defined in terms of the hazard, the natural hazards, right? Not necessarily only the extreme, the fast fast hazards, but also then slow onset events like droughts. So there was agreed that it was necessary to have a fund and activate that fund, operationalize that fund to assist again those countries who are the most affected by the climate change effects. So that was something to be celebrated at that time. Another thing was, another thing that came out of the COP28 in Dubai was the triple renewable. So it was agreed that renewable energy, there was a need to increase the level of gigawatt production per year, right? So it was not more from 3,400 gigawatts, but up to 11,000 gigawatts by 2030, so 5 years from now. So at that time, 2003, 7 years later, they want to triple the capacity of the production of global renewable energy. So there was an ambitious benchmark indicator that the countries agree that was important, right? So that's another milestone for that. And even more important, it was that the means to achieve this triple capacity was by focusing on improving further the efficiency, the energy efficiency that was already in place, right? And this would have a lot of ripple effects on infrastructure, on permissions, and so on. We're not going to get into this. But efficiency more in terms of, let's improve the efficiency. The numbers at that time was from 2% up to 4% until 2030, right? So if you think just the numbers 2 to 4 doesn't mean much, maybe the cost of a country, but globally that means a lot, right? So every single percent have significant changes in the effect of the climate warming, the climate changes. So that's also thing to celebrate. And there are many more things here. There was the other small things at the COP28 that were worth to be mentioning. But also just in terms of the geopolitics, there were the traditional conflict between developing countries. There were more vocal countries that disagree on some aspects. That's worth also looking to for those who are interested in that. So now for the following year that happened last year in Azerbaijan, in Baku, so the COP29. So in general, just to anticipate, some countries thought that it was kind of a retreat. So in the sense that, for example, the fossil fuel agreement that it should be phased out, it didn't come. It was not agreed to come in the final document, right? So that's why it was a kind of backward step to what was expected. It was not actually moving forward to progress. Let's make more pledges. Let's move forward to reduce climate mitigation, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, or more pledges to climate adaptation, and phase out the fossil fuels into the economies, right? So this was considered a backward step. But however, we're going to talk in the next in terms of the finances, but there's a positive and negative. When you see here, the positive is about the pledge of $300 billion annually. So what does that mean? For that, at the time, the developed countries, let's call them the rich, the wealthy countries, if you wish, they pledged to provide $300 billion per year for developing countries by 2035, right? So that at the time sound ambitious pledge because it was tripling the previous 100 billion annual goal that was set back in 2009. So at the time, it was considered an important step forward in terms of, if you see the relationship between more climate funding, and then leading to more actions for mitigating, adapting to climate change in different parts of the globe, particularly in the most vulnerable and in need countries. So that was also considered. However, other countries that's what I mentioned the previous COP, not all the countries were very happy. So because the expectation, or even according to the climate scientists, they are arguing that 3 million is coming 3 million 300 billion US dollars annually was not enough. We needed that 4 times more. We needed 1.3 trillion US dollars annually by 2035 to address the catastrophic events that having higher temperatures would cause on the planet. So, and they associate that with having more money that would allow the global economy to invest more in renewable energy, in energy efficiency, and this all related to climate mitigation, but also as well as to climate adaptation, protect, again, particularly the most vulnerable. So you can see now there's a big gap in terms of the finances. It was a positive takeaway from the triple from the 100 billion to 300 billion, but still far from what actually the final goal. And I just want to keep in mind this number here, this figure, 1.3 trillion, because I will talk about that later. That's what I was saying here before. Not the next slide here is about the current trajectory. So just provide some numbers, right? In case you're not familiar with that. So the United Nations Secretary General, he already said, right? So if the way the climate change negotiations have been going, we are going to exceed what we are expect already. So we can expect that minimal threshold to avoid the worst case scenario of 1.5 we have to start being adapting to an environment where the temperature is going to be higher and the effects are going to be significant. The magnitude, the frequency are going to affect us more. So that's what you, as I mentioned, UN Secretary General already stated. So we are heading now already to a 3 degrees Celsius warming. So you see twice what the Paris Agreement 1.5 to 2 anticipated to avoid just the worst case scenario. So that was, even if you had reached 1.5, would be to avoid the worst case. So 3, you can imagine what can happen, right? So on top of that, when you talk about the current commitments here, okay, one way to reduce these effects is about climate mitigation, right? So the commitments at that time was, okay, 10% cut. So all the countries, they should reduce 10%. But even if that 10% would not be enough, right? So the 10% would not lead to this goal to 1.5, right? So actually, what's actually with the new calculations coming from the expert from the IPCC, they are saying that in order now for us to counter all the increase of the global warming, we have to cut our greenhouse gas emissions to 60%, right? So now the question is that feasible, or how much would that affect the development of their own countries, right? Even the big emitters like the US, China, India, would they agree on this new of the greenhouse emissions when maybe a large part of their economy is based on fossil fuels? So there's a lot of political discussion around this. I see here my internet connection a bit unstable, so I speak slower, and I speak again in case you miss something I said. So it's a bit can be a little bit unsettling to know that maybe there's not much we can do because we are already heading to a scenario where it's almost, people say, this catastrophic, right? So there are a lot of things. Thanks to here, I see that Sonia saying something is not only about money. It's other things that are involved. In this presentation, I focus more on the macroeconomic indicators, but this I would say is more a simplistic way. There are many more aspects that have to be included, and be very happy to discuss that at the end, right? But I just try to analyze from the angles from the macroeconomic factor. But moving on here, so we talk about this, the current trajectory, but I will get there to maybe 2 or 3 slides, something more positive. But right now we can see the trajectory is not something positive. It's not something that we wished back in 2009, 2015, and what we can do now, right? So, and you have to ask yourself, is that realistic to reduce that amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere? What would that cause in terms of economic growth, or in terms of and people would agree that, I mean, the countries, the big emitters, would that agree, right? So that's an important question. So I just want to just then to discuss here is about the gap, right? So as I mentioned in the previous slide, there was a committed for 300 billion gap, but actually needed is, according to the specialists, 4 times more, but also that the gap of the emissions, right? Of to cut the emissions is no more require 10%, but 60%, 6 times more. However, that is not all doom and gloom, right? There is one sector, which is your sector. I assume there are most of you or all of you are in the business sector. That the business sector is where the best hope, not actually to address the aggregate numbers to be the one that are going to be the saviors of climate change, but there's a lot of ideas, there's a lot of momentum going on coming from the business community, right? So these, according to major statistics, I'm going to share the references at the end of the presentation. But according to the World Economic CEO of the climate, the largest 130 CEOs of the biggest companies, they came together, and when you put together all their emissions from 2019 to 2023, you said that their emissions came down 12%. While the revenue of this aggregate of all these companies together increased by 20%. So you see that that the climate change became part of the business model, right? But it not actually became something that push them reduce their competitiveness against in the market, actually increase their competitiveness, and that was shown also in terms of attracting new business, new customers, and strengthening their brand, and reducing the costs, right? So there's a lot of the revenue increase. So that's something really hopeful, and that's why the COP30, we're gonna get there soon too. A lot of people arguing that not only the COP of the implementation, but the COP to bring the businesses, have policies in place to unlock the potential that the business community can bring to keep reducing emissions at a higher rate, but also benefit from it, right? Because green economy is already part of their business mode, right? So again, so if another numbers about the green, let's put in a very simple terms, the green markets, if you see in the total number since 2015, it has grown immensely, right? So $700 billion annually. So, and there are many parts of the green economy that has benefit from it, which can mention the solar, the wind, the EV, the batteries, and now a lot of them, they're cost competitive. Even without subsidies, they can compete against fossil fuel economies, technologies. You can see in the car, you can see in many other different areas. So that's something to be celebrated, but also, again, I'm painting a very simplistic scenario here. If you look into all the different layers, there's so much more we can talk about that. But for this webinar, 30 minutes, I think it's important just to start that conversation. So now that's where we are, right? So this COP has happened now. It's going to finish tomorrow. And as I mentioned, there has been a lot of talk before that. But when the leaders came together, they said, okay, let's not just stop talking. Let's not only talk, but let's walk the talk. Let's be the COP of implementation. As all of you know, it's happening in Brazil, in the Amazon, is in the state of Pará, in the capital of Belém. Belém is considered one of the portals, the cities that is for the entrance of the Amazon. And the Amazon, as you know, has a very important role in terms of capture the greenhouse gases, but also and many other aspects just to the forest itself, right? And some consider put the number that it has a lot of value in itself. There's the number $150 trillion just the forests, not only the Amazon but the tropical forests, right? So there is a symbolic aspect to hold this climate summit at this event at this location now, right? And Brazil is making the most of that. We're going to see that by this here, if you see here, by creating initiative. Okay, if we, the forest, have that play such important role in this discussion, the issue we are trying to solve as a humanity, so we should find a financial incentive to protect that even further, right? So and so there's in the context of developing countries and developed countries, they have different economic growth, different industrialization trajectories. So they should have a financial mechanism that incentivize the countries like Brazil or Indonesia to have this protection, this financial incentive to protect their forests. So Brazil asking for like the Brazil and other countries asking for, okay, let's create a fund to pay countries to protect their forests, and 20%, 1/5 of this money is go direct to the indigenous communities. So because they see that indigenous communities are the forest stewards, that the one who can protect the nature, the forests the best, right? So paying, no longer exploiting, but paying for the protection of the nature, particularly using the indigenous communities and the indigenous knowledge. So, but it's not only, there's also the pledges are coming now, and then we're going to discuss in the next slide. The NDC, I think all of you have come across the national determined contribution. So every country, every 5 years, they have to update their contribution. So how much, what are the actions to adapt to climate change, but also very important to mitigate, to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and they have to update that consistently, right? So that's it's coming according to Le Monde. There was the most recent I could see. There was a momentum gaining, but only 35%, if I'm not mistaken, of the countries has updated by the COP is happening now. So there are many more countries who need to update their NDCs. So again, NDCs are their commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also the plans to adapt to the effects of climate change, climate adaptation, and climate mitigation. But even if they update, there's an important argument that these NDCs are not enough to protect the countries, but also to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions enough to avoid the worst case scenarios, right? Not even now the 1 point, as again, not the 1.5 to 2, but to avoid the 3, and maybe this number can increase over the next years, which we can expect. That's the trajectory if nothing changes, right? So, and again, as I don't need to delong this anymore, but I just want to reinforce that there is a financial roadmap. They try to find ways for this $300 billion annually go up to 1.3 trillion annually, because this is important. Particularly, some argue that climate change mitigation is important, but it's very hard to agree on that. So let's focus on climate change adaptation. How we can live in this new, let's put in quoting catastrophic scenario, right? So we have to adapt and help, particularly those in need. But one thing, as I mentioned before, but just emphasize, this pledge of 300 billion coming was pledged by the developed countries, the rich, wealthy countries, and the remaining was expected to come from the private sector, right? So they try now to discuss what's the best way to get all the necessary fund to accomplish this particular climate change adaptation strategies worldwide, right? So, and also, as you saw, the Brazil have this forest TFFF, 3FF. So they also want to protect the forest. But in addition to that, was very important, understanding and acknowledge the role that agriculture plays particularly in the emission of greenhouse gases. So there has to be the practice of agriculture. It has to be more sustainable, right? So they're discussing this. So, and now again, as I mentioned, move from promises to action. So there's a lot. As I mentioned, there's Brazil as the host. We can discuss another webinar, another masterclass just about the major emitters, particularly China, US, European Union, and India. Very important. But I want you to keep in mind that when we discuss climate change, these climate summits, we have to talk about who are the most disproportionate countries affected, right? Who are the most vulnerable. And these are the ones we have to empower their voices and listen to them. So as a lot, in addition to this, we have to consider the main geopolitical events that have been happening over the last few years. There's a shift toward looking inward, less globalization, more nationalism, which would affect the collaboration, particularly multilateral collaboration, which is essential to address a global issue, which is climate change. A country itself cannot address that. In addition to this, there is, in spite of the uncertainty in terms of the policy in some countries and globally, but there is the private sector that has been producing some momentum and generate some positive numbers. And we have to just acknowledge that the multilateral collaboration is not working as it was a few years back. So what are the new strategies? And this has been discussed now in this COP. So again, just knowing here, there is some likely scenarios, unlikely scenarios, just to anticipate here, just also recycling to what I already said, right? We can expect that not all the countries are going to strengthen their DNC commitments, but some will, right? So there's a progress. We can expect some progress on the finance, like some countries pledging, like Norway pledged. Brazil was the first one to pledge to the forest fund. Norway also pledged. So there is something that policy is going on, right? So maybe more forest protection initiatives like that, and also sector agreements. So not only think about the economy as a whole, but break into different sectors and which sector should be focused on. And agriculture, I didn't mention that, but agriculture is really key because 130% of the total greenhouse gases come from this sector, right? And it's very unlikely to achieve in this COP the full 1.3, right? I don't believe, based on the experts, what people are saying is maybe most likely until tomorrow is we're not going to see that. We're not going to see, unfortunately, the fossil fuel term agree in the final document, and maybe a complete adaptation that particularly is going to protect the most vulnerable nations in the world. So there's a timeline here. So I just reviewing what we said, the 2005, 2006, we expect countries to deliver their update their DNCs, forest protection, finance for the next few years until 2030. Let's hopefully that the triple renewable energy is gonna gain momentum even more, right? Let's double energy through energy efficiency, halt deforestation, protect more the forest. But now I want to focus on your role. What you can do as business. You have to track the commitments that your country has been made, right? And are they delivering? And you have to integrate these climate businesses, these strategies into your own strategies, because now climate change, climate action is no longer something is economic, just generate economic benefit to your business. It doesn't actually as I said, it's not a burden to your business. Not what's the best word to say this is, it adds value in terms of reducing costs, reinforce your image, and even your investors, your suppliers, they require you to have a clear green policy, environmental policy in your own company. So again, what it means for your business. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're off track. The marks are moving. Business care proven, but for your business, and that's what I mentioned here. So you have to really, I think most important takeaway of this slide is that yes, there's a lot of issues at the global scale in terms of policies, but your country, your region, your municipality, they are not stopping. They still have their regulations. So you have to anticipate that, you have to comply with that, and the earlier you do, the ahead you are of the competition, right? And ahead of the competition, because it's a requirement that the market asks your business to comply with, in order to, again, reinforce your brand, get your investors, get the funding you need, and meet all the requirements that you need to operate your business. So there's a many aspects, and even to attract people, particularly the young generation, they are purpose oriented. If you attract the best ones, they're gonna ask you what are the values of the company if they align with their companies. A lot of these students, bright students, they care very strong about these environmental values, and they want to make sure your company is a climate action oriented company. So track your emissions baseline now. Sometimes you have to, because your supplier, if you're supplying to a multinational, they're going to require you to disclose, to be transparent about your emissions, right? So identify how your company can reduce energy, so be more efficient because then you will translate to cost savings. And not only work on CSR, right? Corporate social responsibility, really build a strategy, a marketing strategy, operational strategies based on climate. And you see what the benefit it can bring to your business.
Has any questions, feel free to pop in the chat. Oh, we have one here now.
Yes, fantastic. So I love that the question about Japan protects first. So Japan historically in the region here it provides funding for particularly Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia, which is hold the largest forest in this part of the world, to protect that, right? But also requires some of safeguards for their for their funding. So, and Japan itself in here has a kind of a story that there's a lot of logging, the deforestation. Actually, the area I am, there's a big logging industry here, but also there's a pushback against them, have to preserve their primary forests and so on. But as a country, I would say that it's one of the countries that before it was also making pledges towards the developing countries to protect and to support that. I'm not sure now I don't think they have the same momentum that they used to have. And I'm glad I was surprised to see Norway, because Norway was not providing, but now providing that again to the forest funding there in Brazil. So hopefully Japan traditionally has been one of also the first ones to provide this funding, and you see that provide for this. Maybe by tomorrow you're going to see that Japan doing something about this. Yes, for US, how is current geopolitics impact climate change? That's a really important question. I could talk about that forever. Geopolitics is really passionate about that. I would suggest a webinar. I love it. I have a whole presentation about this about China and the US and India, because India is very vocal in every single COP, and they're very I said a lot of things I said there, being the 300 billion not be enough. India has very strong terms how they define this money, right? So, and China also has make a significant economic pledges, like how they can invest more in the economy, invest in renewable energy. They are the leader by far in green energy, but there's so much more we can talk in terms of the geopolitics, particularly in the context of US and also in the developing countries, the developed versus developing countries. Thanks, Artie.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks again, Marvin, for your great insights as well. I hope everyone got a lot of value from this.